Well, can you believe it hasn't been like 3 months? We're actually back. Like
this is nonstop. We are officially in the season. Right now.
Which season are we like? We're still in basketball season,
We're
right?
still in basketball season. Trade deadlines this week. It's Super Bowl week. There's a lot going on. But when it's indoor season, there's basically only 2 times of the week. It's either show day, or you're waiting for show day.
Yeah,
that's basically what's going on.
So the last couple of weeks, though, we had the Pulse preview show.
Yeah, you know what? I wanted to say something about that.
Okay.
Because Broken City had their preview show last night.
Yeah.
And Pulse had their preview show the week before.
2 weeks.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And
no, wait, no, you're right. The week before. I'm sorry.
It's okay. And the thing I want to say about that is, if anybody ever gets the chance to go to a preview show, it's a really amazing experience because it's not just a chance to get to see these really great groups debut what they've been working on, but the community, right? It's like when you go to these shows, every member from every group, all the local high schools, all the different independent groups, they all get together and support whatever group that is. And then they take big group pictures. They go out to eat with each other afterwards. Like that is a really sort of special, almost tradition, like it's become tradition now that that's what you do at this time of year. So, we've gone to a couple. It's been really, really great to see. I love this time of year.
Yeah, I couldn't make it to the Broken City one yesterday because I unfortunately had to work because I'm trying to make some money for Dayton.
Yeah,
because that's gonna put a little dent in the pocketbook there.
Yeah.
So,
but it'll be worth it.
But yeah, so we have that first SEPA show was on Saturday, the Arcadia show.
RCC debuted their show.
RCC, yeah.
And Arcadia High School and a lot of other great schools and stuff like that. It was really fantastic.
Pulse and Power both there.
Pulse and Power both there. Yeah.
So we'll see how that pans out as we go along. But
I'm like constantly scouring YouTube for lot videos of various groups from across the country. So
you know which ones I like are the ones like when they say, "All right, please don't film during the gym," and you've seen the TV show What's Happening, right?
Yeah.
You remember that episode when Rerun got caught by the Doobie Brothers taking
Yep.
it's like the pirated video.
Yep.
So shout out to the show pirates out there that before they get taken down on YouTube.
Yeah, but I think what's nice is we are so connected, and I can literally it's just a joy when it's like I stumble across a Monarch video or an Infinity video. It doesn't even have to be in the gym, in the lot, and just be like, oh yeah, you get to see the uniforms, you get to see them do their thing for the first time, and it's just a really, really fun time of year.
Yeah. And speaking of winter,
yep,
we are fortunate today that we have someone with us that is not only he is an adjudicator,
yep,
in the winter scene and also in drum corps, but he's also an educator.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And an artist / creator, designer himself. Basically, he can talk about competition, he can talk about education, he can talk about creation.
And then let's not forget entrepreneur as well.
And an entrepreneur and somebody who is doing their part to help others, as they go on their journey.
Man, I got tired. I got tired just saying all that stuff.
Yeah,
so, that's a lot of different hats to wear.
So let's get into it. Let's introduce and bring in Mr. Jeff Ausdemore. Welcome to the shop, Jeff.
Welcome to the shop, Jeff.
Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, gentlemen. What a thrill for me to meet the two of you and have this open-ended conversation. Big fan of the show and can't wait to get into it.
Yeah. Hey, where are you located, Jeff? Just so we know, because we're in Southern California. Whereabouts are you at?
I'm in a place where the weather is not nearly as nice as you, Rob. I'm in Dallas, Texas.
Okay, Dallas. That's a pretty rich area though of percussion. I would think. Yeah.
So, Jeff, let me ask you this question just to sort of start off, because we just, we did our thing to sort of introduce you. I think most of our audience would recognize your name as an adjudicator in DCI, in indoor. There's another portion of the audience that will remember you from your time previous as a designer for Blue Knights. Everybody knows. And we'll talk about it, that you're coming back into the fold with that program starting this season. Some people, probably a different portion of our audience, knows you as an educator. how do you identify? Like if you were to say, this is what I am, how would you define what you do in yourself and what your life is about?
So, George, you're starting off the interview with kind of a home run swinging pitch here. So it's brilliant. It's a brilliant question. And it's one that I've struggled with a lot of my professional career, especially after I stepped over the line from teacher and arranger and composer for drum corps and other ensembles into the adjudication role. And can I share one thing that's helped me in my personal life? So one thing that I read years ago, and just a little peek into kind of my day and into my psyche, when I journal every morning, I do something every morning called The Miracle Morning. It's a book by Hal Elrod. But one of the things that's foundational in my life is I journal, and I go through different aspects of what I believe in my value system. And the number one thing that's at the top of my journal that I reread every morning is keep your identity small. And it's one thing that when I was younger, I put a lot of stock and faith in my identity. So for those that only know me in one realm or another, this is probably going to shock some people, but I'm actually a pianist, and my first love is piano. And so I love playing piano. I actually compose on the piano. I play for fun and outlet. I serve my community at some points. And so when I started to get more involved in percussion, and that story is fascinating, and I love for all the drum corps fans out there, it's such a typical story of how I found such a beautiful art form and came into it. But what I realized is the further down the rabbit hole I went in any of these endeavors, my personal worth and value went with it. And so what I also found is those people that knew me as that only looked at me like that. And that was fine as a young man. I figured, well, in the beginning, right out of high school and studying at schools of music, I wanted to be an orchestral percussionist. So I started down that rabbit hole, and I realized that that's a beautiful way to pursue music. But for me, just personally, it ended up not being a great fit, but I loved the journey. And of course, in graduate school and what I teach now, the excerpts and that part of our musical society is incredibly valid and very special and important to us. But for me, as a lifetime of study, was not a good fit. But I started there. And so when I started to go into kind of a more well-rounded journey of teaching, maybe at this level or that level, I saw that I had a new audience of peers and students. And so they looked at me in that way, and that was fine. And then when I went into the world of drum corps and started helping out drum corps that way, then that was a new identity. And anytime I switched, I struggled with how I saw myself. And everybody in 2023 loves to talk about imposter syndrome. But for me, I didn't have a name for it back then in the 90s and the early 2000s. But when I was switching lanes, it really, really weighed heavily on me. And so the most formidable switch in my life, and you two will understand this better than anyone, when I went from the teaching realm and creation realm with the Blue Knights, I was there as a consultant 04, 05. I think we took over, I think I started 06 to maybe 2010 or 11. When I was asked by DCI to consider joining the adjudication ranks, it was a tremendous honor. And it was something I didn't take lightly. I put a lot of thought into it. But once I put the proverbial green shirt on, I was not prepared for the amount of passion, opinion, and ignorance that comes out of the world. And so I was not prepared for what that would look like, because in any endeavor in life, the further you go one way or the other, the more of an opportunity people have to really, really cast their opinions upon you. And no one prepared me for that. So I was figuring it out as I went. And so that journey of figuring out what my identity was really difficult for me. And so, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in more depth, but for me, gentlemen, there's no greater honor than standing in front of the world's best performers in WGI, DCI, BOA, wherever. It's a tremendous honor. But the trick for me was to really, really stay in the moment of service and not worry about the personal combativeness that really exists between you and your job and the rest of the teams and the rest of the world in that regard.
an interesting. I feel like an interesting next place to go is, and this is your fault, Jeff, for putting this in your bio. Let's go back to the 90s.
Oh boy.
Let's go back to the 90s, and you had put in your bio.
Hold on, do we have pictures?
I mean, we might. I actually,
Rob.
through the power of the internet, we haven't found any yet. Well, let me ask you, because there might be.
There might be.
You had put in your bio that you were part of a group. You were part of the team. You know, like the recording and touring with a group in the mid to late 90s. Talk about that a little bit, and because that's a little bit more of a who am I going to be? What do I want to be? Kind of endeavor. How old were you? And talk about that.
And I'm hoping that the picture that George found is like the right one, because it's like a cross of grunge and Creed. You know, the look. Yeah.
It's pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
So what was that in terms of like those years? What was going on? What were you trying to do back then?
Yes, sir. So what a wild, wild, wild ride this was. So let me set the stage. I was a senior at the University of North Texas studying with an up-and-comer. Maybe you've heard of him. His name is Paul Rennick. Does that ring a bell? Yeah. So obviously had an incredible experience there. My first section leader is Mike McIntosh. I have all these Southern California giants around me. You've got all these Blue Devils and Santa Clara kids around me. And I'm just the first Cavalier to come in and play in the snare line. And we can get into this later, but the way that I hit the drum and I conceived drumming in 1992 was wildly different from everybody around me. So I was in the right place, but boy, did I get my butt kicked. And so worked really hard, and I was inspired by all these people. Of course, Paul was a major, major influence on me in so many ways. And so my path at North Texas was incredible, and I was about ready to graduate. And I got a call one day from a manager in Nashville. This manager introduced themselves and said, "This is so-and-so. I represent a band. We're signed to this record label." And I don't think I knew the name of the band, but as it turns out, when I was just a little younger, I had recorded records for two different bands in Michigan, where I'm from. And one of them, this band, had gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and just kept spinning regionally and got signed to the second largest record label in the entire contemporary Christian gospel industry. And so they called me out and they had asked me if I would consider flying to Nashville to audition. They had another world tour coming up. It was their sophomore record. And so we had a great conversation, and I said, "Thank you so much, but I'm a senior in college. I'm about to graduate. I have all these plans. I'm teaching this crazy group called the Phantom Regiment. I know you don't know what that is, but it's a drum corps, and I love flam drag. So no, I'm not interested." And the last thing the gentleman said to me is, "Go to your nearest Target. I want you to buy the record. I want you to pop it in. And if you don't love all the songs, I will never bother you again." So that night, in Denton, Texas, off of University Avenue, I pulled into a Target and I bought their record.
And they had the record.
They had the record. I pressed play. Track 1 was pretty fun to listen to. Track 2, more incredible harmony. Track 3, I was getting into it, and I thought, this is a really good record. So I called them back, and the rest is history. But the path that was actually taken was groundbreaking at North Texas. The record label, the manager, called the School of Music and talked to the dean. And I was so far in the spring, I wasn't going to get any of my money back. But because the record label had written a letter and spoken to the dean, I actually went to the bursar's office and ended up getting all of my tuition back. So I figured that was a pretty strong sign that I needed to take this opportunity. So I left my senior year of North Texas, dropped everything in the spring of 1995, and drove to Nashville, Tennessee to start recording and rehearsing for the next record and go on tour.
So that first record, I think, is the one we found in terms of doing our research. I think it was called Beginnings.
Beginnings, yeah.
Beginnings was the one before?
Beginnings was the one before I joined, and that drummer is a gentleman by the name of Brad. And so the record that I drummed on and we had a great time with is called "And This Is How I Feel."
That's the second one. That's the second one we found. Yeah.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of silly pictures of our promotional shots.
But the I would sort of describe it as like arena rock, or I mean that first album at
The
least.
first album, yeah.
And I mean, we all know like what was going on at the time. Like grunge was really big, alternative music, but then sort of also
Creed, that was
Creed.
like, yeah.
That kind of music was evolving. And what was it like being in Nashville at the time? Like sort of around, because I mean, for a lot of people, that's the
hub for
that's an end goal, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, it was absolutely wild. So that first record was heavy and it had thick harmonies and guitars and melodies that were, like you mentioned, George, it was arena rock and grunge and Creed influence. The second record we started writing was lighter and it was acoustic guitar driven, just as many harmonies. So we were trying to kind of explore our voice with me in the band. So being in Nashville was this incredible musical petri dish. You had people from all over the world there to make records, kind of carve out their voice. And I was there specifically for one band. So there I was learning how Nashville works. And the side work that I was doing, playing studio work with different engineers or producers, was a totally new world for me. And learning how to strike the drums for Nashville producers, by and large, I don't mean to overgeneralize, but many of them wanted to really squeeze out all of the nuance and expression when you play, which is a large part of our study when we're in music school. Well, a lot of those engineers didn't want that. They want very solid, loud drumming that's very clear. And some of the producers wanted you to play with more touch and finesse. And so that was something that I had to develop, the heavy hand and just making sure that everything was pretty loud and louder. And if that was captured on tape, then they could do a lot with it in terms of lexicon reverb and gating and so on and so forth. But that took a little while to figure out. So some of my favorite sessions that I've done I did a lot of heavy metal work. I did some country work, what you might expect, some gospel, contemporary Christian songwriting. I did an instrumental record for a band in the Southeast that was progressive metal. So that was lots of double bass and odd time signatures. So that was really different for me to learn how to strike the instrument differently. And of course, that ended up bleeding over to when we were playing live, because the live shows required a different touch. And fortunately, our monitor engineer for many years was a percussion major from not Middle Tennessee State University, but it's blanking on me now. But at any rate, he's a percussion major. And so he's a great musician. He could hear really well. So he and I worked together to create the best sound for the front of house. So that was a journey in and of itself. And so that road life was real. When we were not rehearsing and recording just locally, we were out on the road. And I think, gentlemen, that last year that Nouveau was together, I want to say we did close to 240 concerts around the world.
Wow. So, and we will want to jump back into your drum corps and all of that stuff as a performer, and all of that, since you brought it up. But I want to ask you something. Going from the academic setting, right,
yes,
and then getting and basically putting all of that to practice, right? Yes. People, a lot of people sort of they tend not to be so aware of, like, when you go into a professional setting, it's exactly like what you're talking about. There is something that they're asking of you, right? Versus just bringing like yourself into the studio. It's they have certain needs, certain boxes that they're checking off. Do you feel like you were well prepared for that side of it through the education that you received? Like, was that even something that was brought up in class with instructors and things like that?
Great question, George. I would say on the whole, it was not emphasized. I would say that we didn't avoid it, but it was just maybe not as emphasized as highly as maybe, some other schools might focus on it. So, for instance, I actually, ironically enough, without missing any details, since I was already in Nashville, and I needed to finish my undergraduate before going to graduate school, I finished up at a school called Belmont University. Well, Belmont University has a strong commercial program, so that the way that they teach you to think about music, to record music, to songwrite is all about the end goal. It's all about the process by which you conceive a piece of music and get it into the hands of a consumer. So in that little avenue, it was amazingly clear. But again, I want to be careful. I'm not meaning to disparage anyone in my training, because several of my classmates have gone on not only to go to Nashville, but flourish and take the town by storm. You've got Rich Redmond, you've got Jim Riley, Keith Carlock is more New York, not Nashville.
But I love Keith. He's such a
brilliant.
Yeah. When I saw him live, I was just, I forget what he had a sort of a band that he was a regular part of in New York. I went to see him in New York and when they toured in LA.
Yes. Yep.
It was so just, I'm going to use this word. His playing was nasty in like a really good way. You know, it was just so visceral and primal. But really, and I apologize, but when you brought him up, and obviously we know Jim Riley too.
Jim Riley.
Because he's, he had March VK.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff.
Who's the guy that marched Skywriters? That's Cher's drummer.
Oh.
What's his name? Sutter?
Oh, yeah.
Yep, Jason Sutter.
He's a North Texas guy, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So all those North Texas guys are A, brilliantly talented, and B, when they went to LA, New York, Nashville, they figured it out very quickly, and they've been thriving ever since. For me, there was a bit of an adjustment period, but to be fair to that city, it was really the first handful of engineers and producers that I worked with that wanted me to play that way, because it wasn't always that way. So I felt like I was really seen when I was working with an engineer that was just trying to capture my ideas rather than say, I need you to hit the drums this way for this record. Yes, sir. You're the one paying me and it's a session. So I will hit them just the way you want so you can get your sound. And again, that really differs with every engineer.
How hard is it to get gigs as a session musician?
Well, there's a saying that I share probably half a dozen times a year, Rob, and that goes like this. More will happen to you by accident, by being in the right place, than anywhere else than you trying to do it on your own. And I actually saw that play out in my own life. I was actually coming home from tour one night. I was really tired. I was in a grocery store and I had some groceries, and I'm just kind of waiting for my time in line. And the very, very nice lady in front of me was making small talk. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just getting home on a trip. Every other person in Nashville is a songwriter or a musician. So I said, yes, ma'am, I'm just getting home on a trip. She goes, oh, that's cool. That we're just making small talk. And turns out she said her husband is a producer. What? And I said, oh, good for you. That's great. What do you play? And I said, oh, I'm a drummer. And she said, oh, he actually needs a drummer this Friday. And I thought, oh, very nice. And I didn't know if I was busy or anything. So she gives me her phone number or maybe her husband's business card. Didn't think it would amount to much. So I followed up on it the next day or two, and turns out this was an award-winning producer from California. And when I went out there, my bus driver, our bus driver, was kind enough. He drove our equipment van. We went out to the session. We went into this gorgeous, gorgeous studio. And all I remember seeing when I walked in were all these gold records on the walls. And he's from California originally and had a ton of success in the 1980s. And I did several sessions for him. Could not been a nicer guy. Had lots and lots of Jeff Porcaro stories, by the way, because he was an engineer capturing some of Jeff's sessions in the 80s.
Wow.
So that happened by accident because I was in Nashville. And so I got a lot of calls just because I was the drummer for Nouveau. So I didn't try to make it on my own, but just because I was in that community, I probably ended up getting more calls than I would have otherwise.
Yeah. I guess there's a lot to who you know more than what you know, and you got to make those right connections. Yeah.
You have to be both. I always say that when you get that opportunity, if you're not prepared, your reputation will work against you. So I agree with you, Rob. So when that opportunity comes up, and if your preparation meets that opportunity, you're going to be in great shape. But if you get a call because you're in this position and you don't deliver, then people will spread the word not to hire you. So,
because literally you're being asked to be brought into a situation where as the clock ticks, those are dollars that are being spent. So the longer it takes for you to get out there, whatever is needed from you, the more it's, the more expensive it is for the people hiring you.
The studio stuff just fascinates me. Before we move on, I just got to say, I saw a documentary called The Wrecking Crew, and it was about like
Hal Blaine.
Yeah, and I've seen that a bunch of times just because it's fascinating how a small group of people recorded so much of the stuff. But that goes to what you're saying. You got to make sure you're there. You can deliver on what they ask from you, and then if you do, they're always going to be wanting more.
Yeah. And the thing is like by the time you hear about opportunities, it's late, right? Basically, what needs to happen is that you work with people, you're on their minds, they have this picture of you, of like whether you're reliable or not, whether you can produce the thing that they need for you to produce, and then the need has to come up for them, and then they reach out. And to me, that's a better definition of it's who you know. Yeah. The whole networking thing is not about hanging out with people at parties, although there is a little bit of that. You need to be a pleasant person to work with, but it's more about, do they know you? Do they know your work? Do they know what you can do? And do you fit the bill? And do they have the need for your kind of thing?
Can you deliver?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's really any sort of professional art. That is really what is needed.
You nailed it. You nailed it, George.
Let's go back.
Okay.
So your first exposure to music as a thing, right?
Well, let's go back to Michigan.
Exactly. Yeah. Like was it more of your intro into this world, right? Was it more of a general sort of music path, or was it the marching band thing, or like what was your first? Who got you into this?
Great question. And this is going to thrill your drum corps crowd audience. So this is really fun. So I was actually born in Germany, and we came over to the United States when I was very young and traveled around a little bit. We settled in Michigan. So there I am in primary school. And my mother and her entire side of the family is very, very gifted. They grew up singing and harmonizing and playing the piano. And my father's side, perhaps not as much so. Let's leave it at that. And so from a young age, my mother would coach me and help me in piano lessons, and I loved it and loved it and loved it. So then the opportunity to join the band in sixth grade came up, and I had some piano experience by that point. So I was interested in playing percussion. So there I am in sixth grade, but I'm going to a private school. Well, this school district and this community in Grand Ledge, Michigan, had enough foresight to say, listen, they don't offer band at this little Catholic school, so we're going to bus those kids over to the public school every day at the same time. So I was fortunate to get on a bus every day and go over and hang out with the band class. I was in the back of the room reading out of a full band method, playing on beats 2 and 4. I didn't know what a flam was, but I could read music. So fast forward 6th and 7th and 8th grade, and I enjoyed music to a certain extent, but I'm an athlete and I love athletics. So I was playing soccer and I was doing everything you could as an athlete, and I loved it. And music was just okay for me. I was fairly successful at it, but it's only because I was comfortable as a pianist. Well, when I got into high school, the band director there, Mr. Michael Kaufman, is renowned throughout the state of Michigan and probably through the Midwest. He is an incredible band director, but he really focused on contemporary wind literature. So his big thing was, we're going to be working on these war horse pieces. We're going to get up early. We're going to be in sectionals every morning before school, and you're going to know these pieces. And sure enough, the wind ensemble at Grand Ledge High School is very, very strong. However, his take on marching band was very, very much, well, that's not really what we do here. We're not competitive. So what I like to tell people, and hopefully you guys will get a chuckle out of this, I thought marching band was showing up on a Tuesday night from 6 to 7:30 with a flip folder and playing through Hey Baby. That's what I thought marching band was.
Yeah.
And so a dear friend of mine named Brad, Mr. Brad Wool, was a year ahead of me. And Brad comes into the band hall one time as a freshman. He said, Jeff, I want to show you something. I said, hey, Brad, happy summer to you, buddy. He said, come in here. We went into the instrument storage room, and he had a jam box, and he presses play. And I'm hearing some music I'd never heard before, and he gets his sticks out, and he starts playing along. I didn't recognize what he was playing. I was blown away, and he finishes, and he says, you want to know the best part? I said, what could be better than this? You're playing really fast, and it's exciting. He goes, hold out your hand, Jeff. And I said, oh, okay. So I held out my hand, and he plays an open roll on my hand. And at that point, I went, okay, whatever you just did, I want in. I want to figure out what you did, because you just got incredibly strong. And from that moment, he told me all about a drum and bugle corps by the name of Northern Aurora.
Wow,
There you go.
yeah.
Is that a deep cut for you guys?
Oh yeah. Well, we know Northern Aurora.
Your story sounds actually a lot like mine in high school, because my band director was the same way. Not a big marching band thing. He would play like, wind ensemble was thing like Armenian dances 1 and 2, and all the whole stuff, and the typical high school band stuff. But same thing. A senior trumpet player, same cassette, and that got me hooked. But my Northern Aurora connection is that the youth band I was in '91 had bought their old uniforms, and we wore those. Yeah, they were like blue with like a green flap and stuff, and we ended up. Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
We're connected, Rob.
Yeah.
So what era was that? What year was all this happening?
That was 1988, George.
Yep.
Holy smokes! See, I thought you were like a lot younger than we are, but we're like the same age. Because my freshman
Why do you
year
say it
was.
like that? Why do you say it like that?
I mean, I feel old and beat down.
Yeah.
My job has made me like that.
That's funny. No, I'm super, super, super old, guys. So 1988, I was a sophomore, I think I was a junior in high school, and he took me to a camp, and I was just hooked, because most of those students in Northern Aurora were either talented high school students, or there were a lot of Michigan State drumline kids already marching. And so they were playing some stuff. Of course, it was all over my head. And I remember just thinking, how do you manipulate the sticks on that level? I can't even comprehend it. And so I was there to learn and to soak it up. And from that first camp in 1988 till today, I have been absolutely consumed with mechanics and touch and sound quality and facility. That's why I practice every single day. And it's just a big passion for me in terms of pedagogy. But it all started because I saw other people manipulating their instrument in a way that I couldn't even comprehend.
I mean, that's amazing that you're self-aware enough to really actually like make that connection, because we often talk to people a lot about their first exposure. What was that moment like? And can you remember what it was like? But what I like about your story is that the added specificity of it being a very tactile, moment, right? And that has, essentially laid the foundation for something that is still going on. That's great. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So you ended up marching in Northern Aurora. How many years were you there in Northern Aurora for?
I just did it 1 year, Rob, and had a great experience. I like to tell people that I learned how to drum in Northern Aurora. So I had great friends and teachers around me: Jim Pecora, Greg Williams, Trish Bovenchin. My caption head was a guy by the name of Wayne Bovenchin, and Professor Bovenchin teaches at Oklahoma State. And I learned, actually with Wayne, I learned to fall in love with arranging. And that'll come out at some point in our chat today, I'm sure. But Wayne had an approach to arranging as a 17-year-old, 16, whatever I was, that really spoke to me. And at some point, very, very deep inside, I felt like I was so enthralled with learning how to drum, I knew what was next was to figure out how he conceived for us to learn how to drum, and then of course execute what was in his brain. And so just that chemistry of learning to drum from the great Rich Hogan. Rich Hogan is one of my favorite people on planet Earth, and is now in the Lansing area, and one of the most important people in the rudimental activity to know, along with the great Tom Float and the Freddie Sanford and all the greats. Rich Hogan is in that era and taught me a lot about mechanics and touch and how to think about how I was going to improve from point A to point B. Wayne was more of a musician, thinking about, this is the way that I really need all of us to think about this phrase. And so between the two of them, it was a wonderful experience. So I really learned how to drum in Northern Aurora, probably going from 0 to 60 more than anything else. But then when I was out on the road, as you two know, when you're on the road, you see other drum corps. And at that point, I was in Whitewater in 1988, and I was in the front row, and it was my first drum corps show that I was not actually performing in. I was in the stands. Santa Clara came around in that first hit in Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
Man.
I thought my hair had parted. It was so powerful and loud. I think I probably started crying, and my hair's on fire, and my eyes are this big around. And I thought, I need to do that next.
How great is that?
Yeah.
How great is that?
That was such a great era, you know? Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, sir. So I saw what was out there, and I decided to look around. I looked at lots and lots of, and it probably falls way outside of the scope of our chat here today, but looking at Phantom Regiment, auditioning at Star of Indiana, and then the Cavaliers, and then through various connections and decisions at that point in my life, I chose to march in the Cavaliers, and that was a whole new set of experiences.
What
for
a
sure.
great, wow.
Yeah, I didn't know
era
that.
to march
Yeah.
Cavaliers,
Yeah.
though.
Right.
Yeah, those late 80s, early 90s lines. Like 90 is probably one of my favorite lines.
Yeah.
Just
I had
that
this
so clean.
I had this really weird quirk when I marched, because back then things were a little bit more. They were like like rivalries were a little bit more of a thing.
A little more of a thing. That was like the big thing. Yeah.
But I was such a fan of the Cavaliers during that era, because my first year of marching was 90, and I would wear other corps' shirts when I marched, right? So I would be there like at rehearsal with VK, or even like with Blue Devils, with like cadet stuff on or Cavalier stuff on.
Hold on.
Wow.
I can't picture you at a Blue Devils in the mid 90s wearing a Cavalier shirt.
Oh yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And nobody
Well,
told you anything?
95 hadn't happened. yet.
Okay.
95.
All right. Yeah.
So that first year that you went out and auditioned for Cavaliers was 89,
Yes, sir.
and you made it.
Yeah, so I played snare drum for the Cavaliers that next year. Yes, sir. So I remember adjusting my high school schedule to run down there, and my mom drove me to DeKalb.
Hold on. Did you say high school schedule?
High schooler
Yes, sir.
in the Cavaliers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We know somebody who was in high school that marched like a lot of years like that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. But yeah, good. So 89, your mom drives you down to audition for the Cavaliers.
Yeah. And she was very kind, and I was doing a bunch of things in high school. I was writing music, and I got behind on learning my music. So I remember my mom helped me tape my music to the dashboard, and I got my pad out, and I was learning the opener in the passenger seat all the way down to camp. They had already moved in, and I got there late. I probably had some graduation ceremony or something, but I got there late and jumped in, and boy, did I learn a lot. The Cavaliers have such a strong identity, and obviously, like every drum corps, it shifts and it meanders depending on leadership and everything. Yeah. But at that point, I was just blown away at the professionalism that I felt like I was being treated like a member that deserved to be there, and it was calm. Obviously, there are exceptions, but overall, it was very calm. There was a procedure, and I felt like I learned how to rehearse. I learned how to process information and take time between reps. And then my caption head was Mr. Brett Kuhn.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that he processed things and the way that he developed a system for us to play and think about things was really eye-opening to me. And I owe Brett so much of that experience for sure. So that was a very, very different experience than the Northern Aurora for sure.
So how old are you in 89? Were you 15 or 16?
No. I was late in high school, Rob. So I was 17. I probably turned 18 that summer, maybe.